Hello and welcome to World News Tonight, live from Warsaw. My name is Ashim Kumar. There is no other system like this in Europe, said Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk after signing the contract for a cutting-edge anti-drone air defence system. The new system is set to strengthen Poland's frontier, a zone crucial as both NATO's eastern flank and the EU's external border. More on that in a moment, but first, let's take a look at tonight's headlines. Putin attacks Ukraine despite his vow to suspend bombing. It's very dangerous, Trump warns the UK against cooperation with China. And Poland is a leader in economic growth, according to data published today. The system contains 18 batteries, radars, machine guns and attack drones. Together, they create Europe's first multi-layered air defence system. The Polish border will be the most heavily guarded in Europe, the Polish government says. Our defence correspondent Zuzanna Jurek reports.
Today we have witnessed an absolute breakthrough in terms of establishing an effective defense of Poland's, Europe's and NATO's eastern border.
Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk's statement refers to the newly unveiled SUN system, the first of its kind, a multi-layered air defense project primarily designed to combat hostile drones.
We're preparing for the worst scenarios. You all will remember those early experiences with drone incursions last year, which showed how inadequate measures such as fighter jets or missiles are for countering unmanned systems. The SUN platform provides a more effective, cheaper and smarter way to shoot down airborne threats.
Worth over 3.5 billion euros, the project will be primarily financed through the Security Action for Europe or SAFE low-interest loans program. Poland is poised to receive a record of 44 billion euros, as confirmed by the European Commission this week. The project will be carried out by the state-owned Polish armaments group-led consortium in partnership with APS and Norway's Kongsberg, as well as a number of homegrown defense contractors.
This project consists of essential artillery elements, 35mm cannons and 12.7mm heavy machine guns. It also includes non-kinetic systems, various Polish-made jammers and electronic warfare systems, as well as hunter-killer drones that destroy enemy objects by colliding into them. Naturally, it includes command systems and reconnaissance systems, radars and optoelectronic heads. No country in the world possesses so full a spectrum of these kinds of systems. Collaboration is essential to combine elements that may not yet be designed or cannot be produced fast enough by a single nation.
The Polish Defense Minister Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz described the project as an invaluable opportunity for Poland to expand its arms industry.
This Polish way of thinking, of understanding and responding to threats is taken very seriously by other NATO members. I do believe that the SUN system will become Poland's signature export product, a key brand of the Polish defense industry. I can tell you even today, following yesterday's meeting, other countries will be interested in what we have to offer.
As experts have observed, the demand for SUN-like solutions is flourishing across the region.
Other eastern flank countries are also looking for similar systems. Ukraine is trying to build its one based on its own experience. The Nordic countries, Finland in particular, are considering expansion but have yet made any concrete decisions. The Baltic states initially focused on the threat of enemy aviation, but now thanks to the EU's SAFE mechanism, they are now adding low-cost anti-drone systems. Romania is doing the same, as they face Russian drone incursions or close flybys every month during attacks on the Odessa region.
SUN will be rolled out over a period of 24 months. It will function as an open system, meaning that individual components will be updated and upgraded as necessitated by changing security needs along NATO's eastern flank. For TVP World, Zuzanna Jurek.
Rising tensions between Europe and the United States have reignited a familiar debate in Brussels. Should Europe reduce its reliance on the US by having its own army? Our correspondent Alex Carrier shares this analysis.
Well, clearly tensions with the United States and Donald Trump's bullying tactics when it comes to threatening to tariff European allies if they don't let him annex or acquire Greenland in some way has brought back a rather old debate here in Brussels, one about whether or not the European Union needs its own military and overarching European army. Now, we've heard the Spanish foreign minister in the last day or so pushing for that. We've heard Andreas Kubilius, the defense commissioner at the European Commission, also lending his voice in support of that idea. We have seen opposition, however, within the Commission itself. Kosiniak-Kamysz, the EU's top diplomat.
I can't imagine that countries will create a separate European army. So it has to be the armies that already exist. So we need to see how that works in practice. For me, it is understandable that in military you have to have a very straight and understandable chain of command so that whenever something happens, it's clear who gives orders to whom.
Well, we've seen a bit of a halfway house suggestion. That came from Radoslaw Sikorski, the Polish foreign minister, saying perhaps that a fully fledged European army may not be the best idea, but there are other options. Let's have a listen.
I believe that talking about a federal army is pointless and unrealistic because national armies will not be merged. But we could form what I would call a European Legion, initially a brigade-sized unit open to citizens of EU member states and perhaps candidate countries, with agreed rules on the use of force, politically accountable to the Foreign Affairs and Security Council, and funded from the EU budget.
This debate will rumble on, but for now, at least, it seems a European army is not a realistic prospect. For one, we have seen opposition from the former Prime Minister of the Netherlands, now Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte. We've seen opposition from Kosiniak-Kamysz. You will have opposition almost certainly from member states with big defence spending like Poland and France, who do not want to put their forces necessarily entirely under a European army. There is also already cooperation between European countries militarily through, of course, the NATO alliance. This debate will rumble on because of Donald Trump's tactics. Europe wants to boost its security. It's just at times figuring out how. In Brussels, I'm Alex Cadier for TVP World.
Vladimir Putin has launched another wave of strikes, breaking his promise to pause attacks during the winter. Air raid sirens sounded from Kharkiv to Kupiansk, sending civilians running through freezing conditions to find shelter. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy fired back, inviting Putin to Kyiv for talks, if he dares. Now we go live to our correspondent in Kyiv, Oz Chatterjee. Oz, hello, and it seems as though Vladimir Putin has not kept his promises. Does that surprise us?
Well, as always with these things, there's a game of words in the diplomatic space. We heard from Donald Trump on Thursday saying that he had requested a pause for the winter weather that Ukraine is currently experiencing. Kyiv said it would reciprocate any pause if there was a pause on attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, because we have these terrible power cuts throughout the country, people not being able to heat their homes because of these power cuts targeting energy infrastructure, as Russia has done in the last few weeks. Now, we heard from Dmitry Peskov on Friday saying that Vladimir Putin had indeed received a request from the White House for a pause, and there will be a pause until February the 1st, which is Sunday, which is not a long time, particularly given what your interpretation is of the events as well. The Russians seem to think that they are just doing an energy ceasefire. We heard from President Zelenskyy, who confirmed that there had been no attacks on energy infrastructure except for one attack on a gas power plant in Donetsk. So not a total ceasefire. But Zelenskyy then said all of the other places that have been targeted, relentless bombing by Russia across the country, even an American company, Philip Morris, getting targeted. And with regard regards to that ceasefire, the so-called energy ceasefire for the winter weather, the weather is about to get much worse. From Sunday night onwards, temperatures are expected to plunge to below minus 20 degrees centigrade here in Kyiv. So it's going to get very, very cold. And if this energy ceasefire was serious, it certainly would extend to the coldest period. We're about minus 10 at the moment, heading to minus 15 tonight, but it's expected to get much, much colder another week into February. So this ceasefire is not going to do any good for people trying to warm their homes next week if Russia has continued to bombard those energy power plants as they have been for the last few weeks, Ashim.
Sounds very grim indeed, Oz. Thank you so much for that report and stay safe. We will be talking to our guest at the end of this bulletin, so stay tuned on that topic. It seems that US President Donald Trump is still eyeing the Nobel Peace Prize. According to Poland's parliamentary speaker, his US and Israeli counterparts are lobbying in Europe to gather support for his nomination. Kazimierz Wyszak has the story.
Mr. Donald J. Trump, please.
US President Donald Trump hasn't given up on his dream to receive a Nobel Peace Prize, this time for real, not just a medal from an actual winner. House Speaker Mike Johnson and the Speaker of the Israeli Parliament are now lobbying for support, including in Poland.
The Polish Parliament received correspondence from US House Speaker Mike Johnson and Speaker of the Knesset Amir Ohana concerning the support from the Polish Parliament Speaker for their efforts to award President Trump with a Nobel Peace Prize.
Speaker Czarzasty says he will present the Polish Parliament's official stance on Monday. He made that announcement while paying respects to Polish soldiers killed abroad, following Trump's comments on NATO allies avoiding action in Afghanistan.
You know, they'll say they sent some troops to Afghanistan or this or that, and they did. They stayed a little back, a little off the front lines.
What many call the US president's obsession with the Nobel Peace Prize comes in stark contrast to his domestic and foreign policies. The brutality of ICE agents in Minneapolis and the strikes on Venezuela, followed by a lack of regime change. He also created a new international organization called Board of Peace, with Belarus as one of the founding members, and an invitation extended to Russia.
With a country where the number of political prisoners is over 1,100. So a man facilitating war and a man at war with his own people is a very strange individual to be a member.
Trump's threats to take over Greenland, the autonomous territory of Denmark, have also been viewed as contradicting his Nobel Peace Prize aspirations. In this viral clip on the internet, Danes and Greenlanders are telling Trump, "You've brought us closer than ever before with your threats."
Trump deserved the Nobel Peace Prize!
Yes, Mr. President, you are a true peacemaker, because your threats have actually brought Denmark and Greenland closer together than ever.
President Trump also sent a letter to Norway criticizing the country's government for not awarding him the Peace Prize, even though it's awarded by an independent committee. According to the committee, its recipients contribute to fraternity between the nations and the abolition or reduction of standing armies, as well as the formation and spreading of peace congresses. For TVP World, Kazimierz Wyszak.
Western leaders like Keir Starmer, Friedrich Merz and Canada's Mark Carney are warming up to China as relations with the US strain. On Friday, Donald Trump called the UK's overtures to China as, quote, very dangerous. Europe is increasingly dependent on China for critical technologies, and Chinese cars are flooding its markets. Maciej Kulowski has the details.
With transatlantic ties increasingly in question, Europe is quietly pursuing a plan B, diplomacy with China.
European countries are now in a geopolitical quandary because the United States is not predictable and not being particularly friendly, and that's changed everything. So they have to not pivot, I think that's too strong, but they definitely have to diversify, and they have to look at other opportunities.
UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is in China for a 4-day visit where he has discussed strengthening economic and commercial ties with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping. Starmer's visit drew a rebuke from U.S. President Donald Trump.
Well, it's very dangerous for them to do that, and it's even more dangerous, I think, for Canada to get into business with China. Canada's not doing well.
Those comments reflect Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney's own state visit to China earlier this month, which was aimed at reducing trade barriers. Carney even described his country's relationship with China as more predictable than that with the U.S.
In terms of the way that our relationship has progressed in recent months with China, it is more predictable, and you see results coming from that.
And the list of Western leaders traveling to China doesn't end there, as German Chancellor Friedrich Merz plans a state visit for late February. European leaders' outreach to China comes as the continent has become more reliant on the latter for critical technologies like semiconductor chips. Europe's technological dependence was on display last fall when the Dutch government, citing national security concerns, tried to take control of Chinese chipmaker Nexperia, a key supplier of chips to European automakers.
When it comes to mid- and low-end chips, they are dependent on China. If China chooses to apply pressure, it can do so. You have no way out.
At the same time, exports of Chinese cars to Europe, particularly electric ones, have soared, making Europe's legacy car makers such as Volkswagen less competitive. Strategically disadvantaged and caught between two giants, Europe is threading the needle to accommodate both. Maciej Wilowski for TVP World.
And now some good news on the domestic front. Poland's economy grew by 3.6% last year, according to preliminary figures from Statistics Poland. That makes it the fastest growing major economy in the European Union in 2025. Jakub Kabiszewski has the story.
This is the head of Statistics Poland, and he has some very good news.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have only good news for the Polish economy, which expanded in 2025 by 3.6%. When it comes to economic performance, we are surging ahead.
The data confirms the upward path the Polish economy has found itself on recently, and makes the country the fastest growing big economy in the European Union.
The Irish economy probably expanded faster than ours, but as we all know, this is due to the country's specifics when it comes to GDP assessments.
According to Statistics Poland, the main driver of growth was the Polish consumer, who last year enjoyed a solid growth in real wages.
At the same time, inflation eased off, which gave households some breathing room after a period of prices swinging wildly. This resulted in a 4% increase in private consumption.
With the 2025 figure out, economists are starting to predict what 2026 will bring, and if there's one word describing their forecast for Poland, it's optimism.
The rate of expansion will accelerate to 3.7% this year, with some quarters even hitting 4.0%. We expect that in 2026, investments will make a bigger contribution to Poland's economic output.
Poland's second biggest bank, PKO, is even more optimistic and forecasts that Poland's economy will expand by 4% this year, with the rate of expansion slowing in 2027. Economists believe that the only thing that could mar this rosy picture is sluggish exports unable to balance Poles' appetite for buying stuff abroad, which would negatively impact the country's output.
How will Polish exporters fare in 2026? Will they still be able to counteract imports rising due to swelling internal demand within the country? This factor is still unknown.
This, however, depends strictly on how well Poland's main export markets will perform. But even here, the outlook is better than it was in 2025.
President Trump says that Russian President Vladimir Putin agreed on Thursday to a week-long pause in missile attacks on Kyiv due to the bitter winter cold. But with the ceasefire set to expire early on February the 1st, many are asking what, if anything, it means for the conflict. We're joined now by Diane Francis, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. Diane, welcome back to TP World. Thanks for taking time.
No problem.
Much ado about nothing, wasn't it, this promise given to President Trump?
Well, Putin is a sociopath and a ruthless player who has been stringing along Trump and everybody else forever. And I think what he did was he promised Trump, so Trump told the world that he obtained an energy ceasefire commitment from Putin for a week because of the cold weather, only to be, stabbed in the back by Putin because they're bombing the heck out of the place again. So, in other words, Putin was testing him to see how gullible he is, and he flunked the test. He was gullible. He fell for it. And Putin didn't mean it. And, if this doesn't upset or enable Trump to finally admit he's been wrong all along about this guy and start to really go after them pressure-wise, nothing will. I mean, this is such a public embarrassment.
Embarrassment it may be, but is he likely to do an about-face in terms of his attitude towards Putin?
I don't think so. He's playing the game that, he's going to eventually come around or whatever. I don't know what his game is. Some people think it's he's been bribed. I don't think he's been bribed, but I think that he's had a lot of benefits, economic benefits dangled in front of his team by Russia's team to sort of, allow to convince him to play along even longer. But I just don't understand this willingness to be embarrassed and upstaged constantly. That's not like Trump. This is a guy to whom image is number one. He goes around pushing people to give him a Pulitzer Prize he hasn't actually deserved because the committee decided he didn't. And yet he allows himself to be embarrassed by this thug in Moscow. I find it quite strange. And I don't know if we'll ever get an explanation, but he's also very erratic, so maybe that's just it.
Do we expect Putin to push it further? You said that he said this to test how far he could go with Trump. Well, he's seen, he can go as far as he likes and there won't be any repercussions. Do we expect more of that?
Absolutely. He's not going to stop. Not going to stop. They want this piece of Donbass. And they're putting the pressure on because they want to at least walk away with something they don't deserve for sure. Not that they deserve any of the Ukrainian lands that they've conquered in 2 invasions, but, he wants that as a trophy. He wants a trophy, and he wants that Donbass piece, and he wants the Zaporizhia nuclear plant, which is a ticking time bomb, excuse the pun, for Europe. He wants that as well, and, he doesn't want to pay reparations, apologize, or anything else, and he wants NATO to stay out, and he wants everybody to recognize the territories that he occupies, which are all illegally occupied. So, he's not moved an inch. He's not moved an inch, and he's not going to because he doesn't have to because Trump is not making him.
Right. Well, that brings us actually to another point I want to discuss with you, and that is the peace talks that are currently being conducted in the Middle East. We have the second trilateral talks coming up this weekend, and the one sticking point is the one that you just touched on, territory. However, there does seem to be a positive vibe coming out of the last one. What do you think's going on there?
Well, I don't know. The positive vibe is not anything that the Ukrainians have crowed about. But look, I have to say, having trilateral talks is an important step forward. But, he'll just foot drag this longer, Putin, and get a few more inches of Donbass, because that's all he's getting. His army is a mess, and his casualties are sky high. So, he doesn't care. The game for him is saving face, walking away with a so-called victory, and punishing Ukraine as much as he can along the way. I think it's interesting that Zelenskyy publicly said very loudly and in a very interesting way that the United States can win this easily. if there's a lot of things done, more sanctions, more and continue the weapons and so on, that they could easily win this. Now that also introduces a challenge to Trump, and it may be psychologically somewhat helpful in saying that you've got to come away with a little something here, and maybe you cut Donbass in half, or maybe you don't let them have it and get something else. I don't know, but you're negotiating with a sociopath. That's impossible.
Right. Well, I mean, some might say, well, Trump is taking action. He's taking action against the Shadow Fleet. He's confiscating their oil that they're transferring from Russia. What do you make of that kind of dichotomy, if you like, the different ways in which Trump is behaving towards Putin? Does it make any difference to anything?
Well, he's not. Some of the oil tankers that he seized are coming out of Venezuela, so it has to do with the attack and the takeover of Venezuela. I think the Europeans are really behind the eight ball because they haven't. Look, most of the oil tankers out of Russia come down the Baltic or the Black Sea coastlines, which are European waters, and they should be not seizing or blowing up these oil tankers, but actually forcing them into port and holding them, because we've got to stop the cash flow that is financing the war. So Europe has fallen down on this, and so has the Americans as far as the oil fleet. Now the Americans have another weapon, and that is to go after put huge tariffs on the customers of Russian oil, and they haven't done that yet, but that is something that is hanging over their heads, but Russia doesn't seem to be worried about it, and that would affect India and China.
Right. Well, now the other perspective that has been put forward is that Putin is kind of saying what he needs to get Trump off his back in the short term, because he thinks Trump's attention is going to be diverted towards Iran. He's sending what Trump has called an armada of ships to that region. Do you place any weight by that theory?
Well, I think so. I think this guy has got a limited attention span, and also, he's got a 360-degree view of the world, and he's got to deal with a lot of problems. I don't think being president of the United States is easy for anyone, but he is. You could also argue, though, however, he's put pressure because he's attacked Venezuela and Iran, or is going to attack Iran, and he's about to probably invade Cuba. These are all Russian allies, and I think that what you're going to see is, and Russia has not come to their assistance whatsoever. So that hurts Russia's reputation within the alliance. The other thing is the large sanctions to be put on oil. I think that's going to come soon, and I think it's going to come because the Europeans have signed a massive trade deal with India, and India is getting away with murder because what they're doing is they're buying Russian oil, they're refining it and selling it, illicitly back to Europe, which shouldn't be buying it at all. So it's a 2-for-1 hit. I think that's going to happen very shortly, and his Treasury Secretary has warned that.
What does it mean, very, very quickly, if you would, please, Diane, what does it mean for all of these issues that you've raised for the war in Ukraine? Is it going to make a difference on the ground?
It's not making a difference on the ground, but I think that it's got to be taking Russia's eye off the ball slightly, and hopefully emboldening the Europeans to do even more of what they've been doing and really try and bring this to an end. But unfortunately, Ukraine is stuck, I think, in a stalemate war that Russia can't win, and they can't win either. And so the only good thing is that the Ukrainians are incredibly smarter than the Russians, and right. They are deploying drones rather than people against the Russian soldiers.
Thank you very much, Diane Francis. Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you for the analysis and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Bye. And that brings us to the end of this World News Tonight. Goodbye.